Edward, known as Edward Longshanks for his towering stature, and the Hammer of the Scots for his merciless campaigns in Scotland, stands as one of the most formidable monarchs in English history. To the English, he is immortalized as a valiant hero, administrator of laws, and warrior king. Yet to many others, he is reviled as a tyrant of unparalleled cruelty. Many of you may have seen Edward in the film Braveheart, but today, I will be telling you the tale of his entire life. Before ascending the throne, he was known as Lord Edward, as the eldest son of King Henry III. He became embroiled in the intricate political plots of his father's reign from a tender age. In the year 1270, he embarked on the Ninth Crusade, often referred to as Lord Edward's Crusade. In the arid sands of the Holy Land, he clashed with the formidable Egyptian Mamluks and the Bahri dynasty. He survived assassination attempts from organizations perhaps steeped in myth, further cementing his reputation as a seasoned warrior and expanding his understanding of the known world. Edward's conquests did not end there. He conquered Wales, and following the tragic death of the Scottish heir, was summoned to mediate a bitter succession dispute. Seizing the moment, he asserted feudal authority over Scotland, leading to the First Scottish War of Independence. Longshanks cut an imposing figure both as a soldier and as an astute administrator, a man of devout faith who instilled dread in the hearts of his adversaries. He is credited with monumental achievements, such as restoring royal authority in the wake of his father's tumultuous reign, and establishing Parliament as a permanent institution. However, his legacy is marred by allegations of opportunism and cruelty, particularly in his dealings with Wales and Scotland, reflecting a colonial mindset that even extended to Ireland. In the annals of history, Edward Longshanks remains a complex and polarizing figure, embodying both the might and the moral ambiguities of an age defined by conquest and conflict. This is his story. Edward was born in the Palace of Westminster in the year 1239 to King Henry III and Eleanor of Provence, born into the Plantagenet house. An heir of great promise, Edward carried an Anglo-Saxon name that had largely faded from history since the Norman conquest. Yet his father, fueled by a deep reverence for Edward the Confessor, chose to bestow this name upon his firstborn, honouring the legacy of the saint. The birth of Edward was met with celebrations. There was much joy throughout the royal court, which echoed across the realm of England. Just 3 days later, the young prince was baptized in the hallowed halls of Westminster Abbey, a ceremony steeped in splendour. In the years that followed, he was affectionately known as Lord Edward, a title he carried with grace until he ascended the throne in the year 1272. Edward's upbringing mirrored that of an aristocratic boy of his time. He would learn the arts of warfare and administration, though he was described as a sickly child, battling illness in the years 1246, 1247, and 1251. But he overcame these early challenges, growing into a figure of formidable strength and athleticism. Standing at an impressive 6 feet and 2 inches, he towered over most of his peers, earning the epithet Longshanks, a fitting tribute to his long legs. In his youth, Edward's curly hair shone a vibrant blonde, darkening with age before turning white in his later years. His features, though striking, were marred by a drooping left eyelid, a minor flaw in an otherwise commanding visage. Despite a slight lisp, his eloquence and persuasive speech captivated those around him, marking him as a leader destined for greatness. Thus began the saga of Edward, a prince whose journey would resonate through the ages. In the year 1254, amidst growing anxieties of a Castilian invasion of the English-held province of Gascony, King Henry III orchestrated a politically advantageous union between his 15-year-old son, Edward, and the 13-year-old Eleanor, the half-sister of King Alfonso X of Castile. Their marriage, a strategic alliance, took place on November the 1st of the year 1254. This union would eventually lead to the English claim over Ponthieu in the year 1279, as Eleanor inherited the county. In the same year of their marriage, Henry bestowed upon Edward substantial endowments, including the territories of Gascony and much of Ireland, an unprecedented claim that asserted dominion over Ireland, making it forever tied to the English crown. Additionally, Edward received extensive lands in Wales and England, including the illustrious earldom of Chester. Yet, this generosity came with strings attached, as Henry retained considerable control over these lands, particularly in Ireland, reaping most of their income for himself. This division of power sowed the seeds of discord. Between the years of 1254 and 1272, 11 different justiciars were appointed to oversee the governance of Ireland, fostering a cycle of conflict and instability, with rampant corruption plaguing the administration. In Gascony, the royal lieutenant Simon de Montfort, the 6th Earl of Leicester, had been appointed in the year 1253, drawing income from the province and leaving Edward devoid of authority and revenue. By the end of November in the year 1254, Edward and Eleanor journeyed from Castile into Gascony, where they were warmly welcomed by the local populace. From the years 1254 to 1257, Edward found himself under the influence of his mother's kin, the Savoyards, an illustrious Italian dynasty. Among them was the notable Peter II of Savoy, the Queen's uncle, affectionately referred to as Little Charlemagne, who possessed significant estates in Sussex. After the year 1257, Edward's loyalties shifted closer to the Louisian faction, a noble house of French descent that had ruled various principalities across Europe and the Levant. This group included the half-brothers of his father Henry III, notably led by William de Valence. This association was pivotal, as both factions, foreign yet privileged, were met with resentment from the entrenched English aristocracy, who would soon take centre stage in the baronial reform movement of the years to come. Thus, the stage was set for Edward, a prince caught between the allegiances and tides of an evolving realm. In May of the year 1258, a coalition of magnates came together to draft a pivotal document aimed at reforming the king's government, known as the Provisions of Oxford, a manifesto largely directed against the formidable Louisian faction. Edward, steadfast in his loyalty to his political allies, opposed these reforms. Yet, as the movement succeeded in curbing Louisian influence, Edward's stance began to shift. By March of the year 1259, he forged a formal alliance with one of the chief reformers, Richard de Clare, the 6th Earl of Gloucester. Then, on October the 15th, he publicly declared his support for the barons' objectives and their leader, the Earl of Leicester. This transformation in Edward's allegiance may have been driven by pragmatic considerations. The Earl of Leicester held significant sway that could bolster Edward's aspirations in Gascony. Perhaps he aligned himself with those who seemed destined to triumph, whether through the sway of public opinion or the might of arms. When King Henry departed for France in November, Edward's demeanour shifted to one of open defiance. He appointed key figures to advance the reformers' cause, prompting his father to suspect treachery. Upon Henry's return from France, he initially turned away from his son, but reconciliation was eventually brokered through the intervention of Richard of Cornwall and Boniface, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Shortly thereafter, Edward was dispatched to France, where in November of the year 1260 he reunited with the exiled Louisian faction. However, back in England, the early months of the year 1262 saw Edward clash with some of his former Louisian allies over matters of finance. The following year, King Henry tasked him with a campaign in Wales, marking Edward's first taste of battle against the renowned Welsh prince, Llewellyn ap Gruffydd. Yet, as fortune would have it, Edward's forces found themselves besieged in northern Wales, achieving only meagre results against the resilient foe. The path of Edward Longshanks still seemed lost. He was estranged from his father, was trying to establish his own political authority and allies, as well as prove he was a capable battle commander. At the same time, discontent brewed among the barons of Henry III, stirred not only by the king's governance, but also by the omen of widespread famine haunting the realm. Among these barons was Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, a man once regarded as a foreign interloper, despised for his ties to Henry's foreign council. Simon inherited the English title through his mother, and he would also boldly wed King Henry's sister Eleanor, with the king's blessing, but without the necessary approval of the English barons. This act soon ignited a fierce rivalry between Simon and the king, who was swayed by his barons' outrage. Many of the barons feared that Henry was treading the treacherous path of his infamous father, King John, and felt compelled to rein him in. In this turbulent climate, Simon de Montfort emerged as a champion for the reassertion of the Magna Carta, a royal charter that promised the safeguarding of the church's rights, protection for barons against unlawful imprisonment, swift and impartial justice, and restrictions on feudal payments to the crown, governed by a council of 25 barons. Under immense pressure, Henry was compelled to swear an oath to convene a Grand Council, a parliament every 3 years to oversee the nation's affairs. Desperate to reclaim his authority, Henry sought the support of King Louis IX of France in the year 1259 through the Treaty of Paris, wherein he agreed to relinquish the lands lost since the year 1202. By the year 1261, he secured a papal bull that absolved him of his oath to the barons, igniting his ambitions to reassert control. In response, the baronial opposition convened their own parliament, vying for control of local governance. However, faced with the possibility of civil war, they retreated. De Montfort fled to France, while Richard de Clare shifted his allegiance back to the king. In April of the year 1263, Simon de Montfort returned to England, rallying a council of rebellious barons at Oxford. Tensions escalated into violence in the Welsh marshes, and by autumn, both factions had assembled formidable armies. De Montfort advanced on London, inciting a rebellion that trapped the king and queen in the Tower of London, taking them captive while he assumed effective control of the government in Henry's name. Yet, the fragile coalition of support soon fractured, allowing Henry to reclaim his freedom. As chaos spread and the threat of full-scale war loomed, King Henry, humiliated and full of wrath, turned to King Louis of France. After initial hesitation, de Montfort consented. In January of the year 1264, the Mise of Amiens, a settlement where King Louis was the mediator between King Henry and the barons, saw Louis favouring Henry. While some barons accepted this verdict, a more radical faction, led by de Montfort, prepared to resist any attempt to reassert royal power. Thus, both sides readied themselves for an impending storm of war. the country would plunge into civil war, and Simon de Montfort, in control of London, assembled his forces at St Albans and marched to relieve Northampton, which was under siege by the Royalists, but he was too late to prevent the town's capture by betrayal. He then moved into Kent and laid siege to the royal stronghold of Rochester Castle, but on hearing reports of a royal advance to London, he withdrew most of his forces from siege to confront this threat. As Henry moved into Sussex, he found himself confronted by the relentless Simon de Montfort, who had rallied his forces from London in hot pursuit. This confrontation culminated in the fierce Battle of Lewes. Lord Edward, having made his fateful choice, stood resolutely with his father during the Barons' War. The Royalist army, a formidable force nearly twice the size of de Montfort's, prepared for the clash. At the heart of this battle, Henry commanded the centre, flanked by his son Edward, who would have been in his early 20s, and other loyalists. At dawn, the baronial forces launched a surprise attack on the royal foragers, igniting the battle with ferocity. Seizing the moment, Henry commanded a counter-offensive, and Edward led a thunderous cavalry charge against the rebels, stationed on the left flank of the baronial line. The rebels fled towards the village of Offham, with Lord Edward in relentless pursuit, and bloodlust gave chase, leaving the king to face the enemy alone. With Henry now isolated, he ordered an assault with his centre and right divisions up Offham Hill, where the baronial line waited with fierce determination. Henry's men fought valiantly until they were compelled to retreat. Overwhelmed by the fresh troops, de Montfort had strategically held in reserve. The remnants of the king's forces were driven down the hill, where they engaged in a desperate fighting retreat towards the safety of a castle and priory. Edward, returning with his weary cavalry, launched a counterattack. However, as he sought out his father amidst the chaos, he was persuaded that the flames consuming the nearby town and the flight of many royal supporters signalled it was time to heed de Montfort's renewed offer for negotiation. The aftermath of this fierce engagement left King Henry diminished to a mere figurehead, while de Montfort, seizing the moment, expanded parliamentary representation to encompass not just the nobility, but also representatives from each county of England and key towns, forever altering the landscape of governance in the realm. Simon de Montfort, the 6th Earl of Leicester, had ascended to a formidable position of power within the government of the Kingdom of England. His authority was solidified by a resounding victory at the Battle of Lewes just a year prior. In the aftermath of that fateful engagement, he held the king himself, Henry III, along with Prince Edward and the king's brother Richard of Cornwall, firmly in his grasp as hostages. The royal authority of England were reduced to mere captives. Yet, as the seasons changed, so too did the fortunes of de Montfort and the country's self-appointed regent. His sphere of influence soon began to diminish, rapidly eroding due to the loss of vital allies who had once bolstered his cause. In February, the tides of fate shifted ominously when Robert de Ferrers, the Earl of Derby, was arrested and imprisoned within the grim confines of the Tower of London. But it was the defection of an even more crucial ally that dealt a devastating blow. In May, Gilbert de Clare, the Earl of Gloucester, once the stalwart supporter of de Montfort, abandoned the cause, pledging his allegiance instead to the king. This pivotal betrayal enabled Prince Edward to escape the confines of de Montfort's captivity, setting the stage for a dramatic resurgence of royal power. Emboldened by his newfound freedom, Edward forged an alliance with Gilbert the Earl of Gloucester and set about raising a new royalist army, determined to reclaim the crown's dignity and assert their rightful place in the realm. This alliance would ultimately lead to the climactic Battle of Evesham, where the young prince known as Lord Edward would take command. Drawing upon the hard-earned lessons of the defeat at Lewes, the royalists resolved to secure the high ground, a tactical advantage that could spell the difference between victory and ruin. They chose the ridge known as Green Hill. Edward strategically positioned his troops on the left. As dawn broke, a storm brewed on the horizon, mirroring the brewing conflict about to erupt. In the previous clash at Lewes, the baronial forces had drawn strength from an almost divine sense of destiny, their white crosses serving as symbols of their righteous cause. This time, however, the royalists bore a red cross, a vibrant mark of their determination. One chronicler noted that upon witnessing the advance of the royal troops, de Montfort scoffed, exclaiming, "They have not learned that for themselves, but were taught it by me," his arrogance blinding him to the shifting tides of loyalty. The opposing forces were estimated to number around 5,000 for the baronial side, against a staggering 10,000 royalists. Facing such unfavourable odds, de Montfort resolved to concentrate his efforts on the centre of the enemy's front, hoping to carve a wedge through their ranks. His tactics, initially promising, soon faltered as the royalists regained the initiative. With fierce determination, the flanks of Edward's army began to encircle de Montfort's, cutting off any avenues of escape and sealing their fate. As the battle unfolded, the landscape became a tapestry of chaos and carnage. Confronted by a force nearly double his own, de Montfort found himself trapped on unfavourable ground, the tide of battle swiftly transforming into a massacre. The royalists fought with a vengeful spirit, their memories of defeat fueling their anger and desperation. Despite the cries for mercy and attempts to surrender, the baronial rebels faced a brutal end, their lives extinguished rather than offered the mercy of ransom, a brutal break from the chivalric traditions of the time. What transpired on the battlefield would echo through the ages, as an episode of noble bloodletting unprecedented since the Conquest. De Montfort's son Henry fell first, a grim reminder of the stakes at play. In the thick of the melee, Simon de Montfort himself was unhorsed, fighting valiantly until the bitter end. His body was not spared. His head, hands, feet, and testicles were severed, a brutal fate befitting the once great leader who had dared to challenge the crown. As the dust settled, the remnants of de Montfort's forces lay dead on the battlefield, and the weight of this day would echo through the annals of history, marking a decisive turning point in the epic struggle for power within the kingdom. The saga of de Montfort, a tale of ambition, betrayal and bloodshed, would be forever etched in the chronicles of England, a stark reminder of the precarious balance of power and the relentless tides of fate. To the royalists, Edward emerged not merely as a prince, but as a hero and warrior, a symbol of loyalty and bravery in a kingdom that had weathered the storm of treachery. In the annals of history, he would forever be remembered as the loyal champion who stood against the tides of rebellion, restoring the honour of the crown and securing the future of the realm. Due to this, Edward was made the steward of England and began to exercise influence in the government. From being estranged from his father some 10 years before, he had become his father's saviour. Despite this, he was little involved in the settlement of negotiation following the wars. His main focus was on planning his forthcoming crusade. Prince Edward had matured into a formidable military commander, poised to lead a bold expedition that would become known as the Ninth Crusade. On the fateful day of June the 24th, in the year 1268, in a grand and solemn ceremony, Edward pledged his life and honour to this noble cause. Edward's forces were a blend of valiant warriors, comprising 225 knights, supported by a contingent of infantrymen and archers, totaling fewer than 1,000 men. This band of crusaders were determined to stand against the tide of adversity in a time when the Christian presence in the Holy Land was fragile. Jerusalem had fallen to the Muslims in the year 1244, leaving the Kingdom of Jerusalem's heart now beating in the city of Acca. The Muslim states, unified under the formidable leadership of Sultan Baybars of Egypt and Syria, were on the offensive. Sultan Baybar's reign heralded an era of Mamluk supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, showcasing a military prowess that would all but extinguish the Crusaders' foothold in the Levant. Under his command, the Mamluks not only repelled threats from both Crusaders and Mongols. In the year 1268, Baybars captured Antioch, obliterating the last remnants of the Principality of Antioch and solidifying Mamluk control on the northern front, which cast a long shadow over the small Crusader county of Tripoli. With the support of both royal and papal authority, Edward donned the symbol of the Crusaders' cross on that momentous day, ready to gain glory. When King Louis IX of France mustered a grand army with intentions to strike at the heart of Egypt, fate twisted its course, leading him instead to Tunis, where he would succumb to illness in the year 1270. Edward and his brother Edmund prepared to join this crusading endeavour in Tunis, yet their plans were repeatedly delayed through summer months. King Henry III of England wavered in his decision to participate, ultimately opting to remain in England on the council of his advisors. On August the 20th, in the year 1270, the Crusaders finally embarked from Dover, embarking on a journey fraught with uncertainty and peril. In a striking departure from the norms of the age, Edward's beloved wife Eleanor of Castile chose to accompany him, refusing to be parted from her husband as they ventured into the unknown, their fates intertwined. Thus, with hearts ablaze and spirits undeterred, they set sail determined to reclaim the sacred lands and restore honour of Christendom amidst the gathering storm. Edward travelled slowly through France. He went from there to Sardinia, where he waited a month before crossing to Tunis. On the fateful day of November the 18th, Charles of Sicily granted Prince Edward a safe conduct, allowing him to remain on the sun-kissed shores of Sicily while he contemplated the next chapter of his epic journey. Edward resolved to press onward to the Holy Land, determined to lend his strength to Bohemond VI, the valiant Prince of Antioch and Count of Tripoli, in their desperate struggle against the encroaching Mamluk threat that loomed over the remnants of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. After many trials and tribulations, Edward finally reached the storied city of Acca on May the 9th of the year 1271, arriving with a fleet that comprised 8 majestic sailing vessels and 30 agile galleys. Yet, as he gazed upon the landscape, he quickly realised that the forces at his command were insufficient to confront the Mamluks in open battle. Determined not to cower in the face of adversity, Edward opted to launch a series of daring raids. His forces captured the town of Nazareth, igniting a campaign of skirmishes that would burn the fields and homes of the enemy. Yet, despite their bravery, the results were meagre, and the relentless heat claimed some of his weary men. However, hope flickered anew with the arrival of reinforcements from England and the valiant Hugh III of Cyprus, led by Edward's younger brother Edmund. December of the year 1271 brought a tempest of action, as Edward and his men heroically repelled a fierce assault on Acre, launched by the formidable Baybars. Though Baybars ultimately abandoned his siege of Tripoli, the reasons for his retreat remained shrouded in mystery, a reminder of the unpredictable tides of war. Edward would make an attempt at a Franco-Mongol alliance, sending an emissary to the Mongol ruler of Persia. His plan bore fruit, instigating a formidable assault as 10,000 horsemen raided in Aleppo, devastating the surrounding lands. Yet, like a fleeting shadow, the Mongols did not linger in the land of promise. When the Mamluk leader Baybars mounted a counter-offensive, the Mongols had already retreated beyond the mighty Euphrates, their spoils of war heavy upon them. During this tense interval, Baybars grew increasingly wary of a potential combined land-sea assault upon Egypt, a maneuver that threatened to unseat him from his hard-won dominion. Recognizing the peril that loomed on the horizon, he resolved to fortify his position by constructing a formidable fleet. Once his naval vassals were completed, Baybars set his sights on a cunning stratagem. Instead of confronting the Crusader army directly, he plotted to land upon the shores of Cyprus in the year 1271. His aim was to lure Hugh III of Cyprus, the nominal king of Jerusalem, and his fleet away from Acre, thereby isolating Edward and the rest of the Crusaders in the Holy Land. Under the cloak of deception, Baybars disguised 17 war galleys as humble Christian vessels, launching a surprise attack on Limassol, which is a city in Cyprus. However, in the tumultuous naval engagement that ensued, the Mamluk fleet met its doom and were forced to retreat, their ambitions thwarted by the tides of fortune. In the wake of this stroke of luck, Prince Edward recognized the necessity of forging a united front to reclaim Jerusalem from the clutches of the Mamluks. Understanding that internal strife within the Christian realm could spell disaster, he stepped forward as a mediator between Hugh III and the hesitant knights of the Ibelin family of Cyprus, who viewed the situation with a wary eye. Meanwhile, Edward and Hugh engaged in delicate negotiations with Baybars, crafting a truce that would span 10 years, 10 months, and 10 days. This historic accord was reached in May of the year 1272. Almost immediately following the signing of the treaty, Edmund, Edward's loyal brother, set sail for England, leaving Edward behind to observe whether this fragile peace would endure. The following month, a shadow of treachery descended upon Edward, heralded by a bold assassination attempt. On a fateful night in June of the year 1272, beneath the storied ramparts of Acre, the English Prince Edward and his cherished wife Eleanor were sleeping. Their peaceful slumber was abruptly disturbed by the arrival of a spy, a man who had once been a Muslim but had converted to Christianity, serving Edward since his arrival in the Holy Land. Edward, roused from his dreams, emerged from their chamber clad in only his undergarments, his heart quickening with both curiosity and caution as he summoned the spy to present himself. What transpired next, as chronicled by the esteemed Templar of Tyre, was a harrowing clash that would echo through the annals of history. The Saracen met him and stabbed him on the hip with a dagger, making a deep, dangerous wound. Then, Lord Edward felt himself struck, and he struck the Saracen a blow with his fist on the temple, which knocked him senseless to the ground for a moment. Then Lord Edward grabbed a dagger from the table which was in his chamber, and stabbed the Saracen in the head and killed him. Yet, even as the echoes of violence faded, danger loomed large, for the assassin's dagger had been smeared with a lethal poison. Officials and healers rushed to the prince's side, their hearts pounding with urgency. What followed is a tale woven with varying threads, depending on the chronicler. One account speaks of Eleanor, her love and bravery shining through the darkness, as she heroically sucked the poison from Edward's wound, risking her own life for his. Another version recounts the arrival of an English surgeon, who with grim resolve began to heal the infected flesh around the wound. Whispers of conspiracy swirled the air, and speculation arose regarding the mastermind behind this audacious assassination attempt. Some pointed to the Sultan, while others whispered of the enigmatic Ismaili leader known as the Old Man of the Mountains, a figure steeped in legend and mystery. However, the true menace facing the Mamluk state did not arise from the Crusaders, but rather from the relentless advance of the Mongols. Edward's alliance with the Mongols may have provoked the Sultan, prompting him to dispatch assassins against the prince. Alternatively, the Old Man of the Mountains may have sent one of his devoted followers to eliminate Edward, incensed by the prince's disruption of the region. The true motives of the assassins remain shrouded in the mists of time, lost to history. But the attempt on Edward's life and the lingering effects of the poison left him weakened and vulnerable, ultimately persuading him to abandon his campaign, his dreams of glory dimmed by the spectre of betrayal. It was not until the 24th of September of the year 1272 that Prince Edward departed the storied city of Acre, the final stronghold of the Crusaders' Holy Land. His journey led him to the shores of Sicily, where the vibrant Mediterranean air was heavy with the weight of destiny. It was there, amid the bustling life of the island, that Edward received the heart-treading news of his father's death on November the 16th. The sorrow struck him like a thunderbolt, a sorrow that pierced through the armour of a seasoned warrior. Yet, rather than rush home to his grieving kingdom, Edward chose to embark on a deliberate and measured journey northwards, his heart heavy with loss, but his resolve tempered by the remnants of the poison coursing through his body. His journey was not marked by haste. Instead, he navigated through the landscapes of Italy, reflecting on the legacy of his father and the responsibilities that now awaited him. It was not until the 2nd of August of the year 1274, nearly 2 years later, that Edward finally set foot on English soil. The 35-year-old prince, now a battle-hardened king, bore the mark of both conflict and maturity. On the 19th of August, he ascended to the throne in a solemn coronation ceremony at Westminster Abbey, accompanied by his devoted queen Eleanor. Yet, as the golden crown was placed upon his head, Edward, filled with a sense of purpose, removed it immediately, proclaiming to those gathered that he would not don it again until he had reclaimed all the crown lands that had been surrendered during his father's reign. In the tumultuous aftermath of the Barons' War, Llewellyn ap Gruffydd found himself in a position of precarious advantage, basking in the glory of his title as Prince of Wales. The Prince of Wales would refuse to pay homage to the newly crowned King of England, Edward, citing ongoing hostilities and Edward's sheltering of his enemies. This defiance culminated in November of the year 1276, when Edward, driven by a desire to assert his authority, declared war against the Welsh prince. Support for the prince, however, proved to be waning among his own countrymen, a harbinger of the struggles to come. In July of the year 1277, Edward launched a formidable invasion, commanding a vast force of 15,000 men, including 9,000 Welshmen compelled to serve under his banner. The campaign unfolded not in grand, sweeping battles, but rather in a series of calculated manoeuvres that left Llewellyn with no choice but to surrender, recognising the futility of further resistance. Yet the conflict between Edward and the Welsh would soon reignite, this time driven by deeper currents of national identity and the fierce desire to uphold traditional Welsh law. In the year 1282, the conflict morphed into a struggle for the very soul of Wales, ignited by abuses within the English legal system that sought to depossess prominent Welsh landowners, many of whom had once opposed Edward's rule. For the Welsh, this was a fight for survival. For Edward, it transformed into a war of conquest. The tragic fate of the Prince of Wales culminated at the fateful Battle of Orwin Bridge, where he fell, his life extinguished in the chaos of conflict. His severed head was paraded through the streets of London as a grim trophy. With the organised resistance to English rule shattered, Edward turned his attention to reshaping the very landscape of Wales, erecting formidable fortresses that would serve as new centres of civil and judicial administration. This architectural renaissance heralded the introduction of arrow slits in castle walls across Europe, drawing upon Eastern influences and marking a significant evolution in military architecture. By the 1280s, the relationship between England and Scotland stood at a remarkable crossroads of relative harmony. Unlike the bitter strife that characterised the Welsh confrontations, the issue of homage was a more amicable affair. In the year 1278, King Alexander III of Scotland paid homage to Edward, but it was a gesture confined solely to the lands he held in England. Alexander did not recognise Edward as Scotland's overlord, fostering a cordial relationship between the two crowns. This semblance of tranquility was shattered with the untimely death of Alexander in the year 1286. His passing left the Scottish throne in peril, for he bequeathed the crown to his only surviving descendant, his 3-year-old granddaughter Margaret. By the time she set sail from Norway for Scotland in the autumn of the year 1290, Margaret had blossomed into a spirited 7-year-old. Yet, fate dealt a cruel hand. She fell gravely ill during her journey and tragically succumbed to her illness in Orkney, leaving Scotland without an evident heir and plunging the nation into a storm of uncertainty, known as the Great Cause. Amidst this chaotic backdrop, as many as 14 claimants emerged, each vying for the vacant throne. However, the most formidable contenders were John Balliol and Robert de Bruce, the 5th Lord of Annandale. In their desperation for resolution, the Scottish magnates turned to Edward, beseeching him to oversee the proceedings and administer justice. Yet Edward, ever the astute ruler, insisted upon being recognised as Scotland's overlord, a demand met with reluctance and defiance from the Scots. They countered that in the absence of a king, no one held authority to dictate such terms. The stalemate was ultimately circumvented when the claimants agreed to surrender the realm to Edward, awaiting the emergence of a rightful heir. After a lengthy and contentious hearing, a decision was rendered in favour of John Balliol on the 17th of November in the year 1292. Yet, even as Balliol ascended to the throne, Edward's iron grip on Scotland tightened. He summoned Balliol to appear before the English Parliament, demanding military assistance against France. This overreach proved unacceptable to the Scots, who, in a bold display of resistance, forged an alliance with France and launched an ill-fated assault on Carlisle, determined not to fight for an English king. By the year 1296, Edward's patience wore thin, culminating in the ruthless sack of Berwick. The town fell under his siege, its citizens powerless against the onslaught. In a chilling display of tyrannical rage, Edward unleashed a massacre that would haunt the annals of history. For 2 long days, the streets ran red with the blood of 7,500 souls, men, women, and children, all mercilessly slain in a brutal demonstration of power, so that mills could be turned by the flow of their blood. Following the harrowing massacre, Edward sought to crush any lingering Scottish resistance. The Battle of Dunbar soon followed, where the remnants of Scottish defiance were effectively extinguished. Edward, in his unrelenting pursuit of dominance, seized the fabled Stone of Destiny, an ancient relic revered as the coronation stone of the first kings of Scotland. This cherished artifact, steeped in legend and pride, was transported to Westminster and placed within what would come to be known as King Edward's chair. With the throne now firmly in his grasp, Edward deposed Balliol, imprisoning him in the Tower of London, while installing English officials to govern the conquered lands. The campaign had yielded significant success, and Edward emerged as a formidable monarch, having subdued both Wales and Scotland under his rule. His power resonated through the ages, drawing comparisons to the ancient Anglo-Saxon king Aethelstan, for both had bent the Isle of Britannia to their indomitable will. Yet, even amid this triumph, the embers of resistance smouldered in the hearts of the Scots, foreshadowing the fierce struggles that lay ahead in the relentless pursuit of their sovereignty. Edward of England believed he had firmly grasped the reins of Scotland's fate when he departed the land in the year 1296. Yet, resistance swiftly emerged under the leadership of Andrew de Moray and William Wallace. On the fateful day of the 11th of September in the year 1297, an English force vast and formidable found itself ensnared in a storm of Scottish valour. Though fewer in number, Wallace and Moray led their men to a stunning victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. In the wake of this Scottish uprising, Edward returned from Flanders, his spirit ablaze with fury and determination to quash the rebels once and for all. The Scots were without a king, rallied around the figure of William Wallace, who had become a symbol of their yearning for freedom and justice. However, even this titan of liberty would find himself facing the formidable Edward Longshanks, a man whose very name inspired fear and whose stature and character loomed larger than life itself. It would be a clash of legends, a confrontation between titans whose destinies were woven together by the threads of conflict. On the scorching summer day of the 22nd of July in the year 1298, Edward unleashed his wrath upon Wallace's forces at the Battle of Falkirk, where the Scottish dream of independence was shattered beneath the weight of English steel. Edward's relentless campaign continued. In the year 1300, he pressed further into the heart of Scotland, yet the Scots, embodying the spirit of defiance, chose to avoid open battle, opting instead for guerrilla tactics that harried the English forces, striking like shadows in the night. By the year 1303, the tides of political alliances shifted dramatically with the signing of a peace treaty between England and France, effectively dismantling the Franco-Scottish alliance. Robert the Bruce, a man of noble lineage and a claimant to the Scottish crown, had in the winter of 1301 and 02 aligned himself with the English, but this alliance would not endure. In the year 1304, with most of the Scottish nobility pledging their fealty to Edward, the English managed to recapture the strategic stronghold of Stirling Castle. A bitter blow to Scottish pride came in the year 1305, when Wallace, the revered champion of independence, was betrayed by one of his men. Captured and transported to London, he faced a grim fate in a public execution that served as a spectacle for the English, reinforcing their dominion over the land. With Scotland now effectively leaderless and under the yoke of English control, Edward took decisive measures to consolidate his rule, appointing Englishmen and those Scots willing to collaborate to govern the realm. But the tides of fortune are ever fickle, and on the 10th of February in the year 1306, a spark ignited the embers of rebellion once more when Robert the Bruce, in an act of fierce resolve, struck down his rival John Comyn. Just weeks later, on the 25th of March, he donned the crown of Scotland, igniting a renewed campaign for independence that would catch the English unaware. At the age of 67, Edward, frail and weary from the burdens of time, dispatched his barons to quell the new uprising. In the following battle, the Scots were dealt a crushing blow, forcing Bruce into the shadows, his spirit unbroken yet battered. In an unprecedented display of cruelty, Edward unleashed his wrath upon Bruce's kin and supporters. His sister Mary languished in a cage for 4 agonizing years, while Isabella Macduff, the woman who crowned Bruce, endured a similar fate. The fate of Bruce's younger brother was particularly grim. Captured after he heroically defended his garrison, he faced the grisly punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering. To Edward, the conflict morphed from a noble struggle between nations into a brutal suppression of treachery, a rebellion of disloyal subjects that must be quelled at all costs. However, this very brutality, rather than extinguishing the flames of resistance, kindled a fervour among the Scottish people, rallying support behind Robert the Bruce as their rightful leader in the fight for freedom. Thus the struggle continued, echoing through the annals of history, a saga of courage, betrayal, and the unyielding quest for independence. Upon receiving word of Robert the Bruce's resolve to reclaim Scotland's sovereignty, Edward, the King of England, hastened northward, his spirit aflame with ambition to quell the rebellious tide once more. Yet fate, ever capricious, dealt him a cruel hand. As the 68-year-old monarch traversed the rugged landscape towards the Scottish border, he was beset by a debilitating affliction, dysentery. His condition swiftly deteriorated, transforming his once formidable presence into that of a frail old man. On the 7th of July, in the year 1307, Edward breathed his last. From the shadows of history, various tales emerged regarding the king's final wishes. According to one tradition, he expressed a desire for his heart to be transported to the Holy Land, accompanied by an army destined to confront the infidels and reclaim the sacred lands for Christendom. Yet another, perhaps more dubious, spoke of his yearning for his very bones to be borne aloft the future campaigns against the Scots, a spectral presence guiding his forces in death as he had in life. Throughout his reign, Edward was known for his nature, a man of fierce temperament who could instill both awe and fear in the hearts of his subjects. One harrowing tale recounted how the Dean of St. Paul's, emboldened by the matter of taxation in the year 1295, collapsed and perished upon entering the king's presence, succumbing to the sheer force of Edward's imposing stature and intensity. In his earlier days, Edward's contemporaries viewed him as a figure of formidable prowess, alike to a leopard, an emblem of power and unpredictability. Yet beneath this fierce exterior lay a more tender side. Edward was devoted to his extensive family, showering his daughters with lavish gifts and affection whenever they graced the royal court. Despite the harshness that marked his rule, Edward garnered respect and fear among his English subjects. While he may not have been beloved in the hearts of the people, he commanded a unique reverence, evident in the absence of armed rebellion during his reign. The legacy of his father had left the kingdom vulnerable, but Edward, a soldier king in every sense, rebuilt England's military might with the tenacity of a warrior, reflecting the very persona that defined him. Edward's legacy extended through his children. By his first wife, Eleanor, he fathered at least 14 children, perhaps as many as 16. Among these, 5 daughters flourished into adulthood, yet only one son, Edward II, survived to bear the mantle of kingship after his father's passing. With Margaret of France, Edward fathered 2 sons who grew to maturity. The storied life of Edward, a king of contrasting legacies, came to its conclusion as a glorious monarch forever remembered as both a tyrant and a saviour of England. His tale endures, a saga etched in the annals of history, embodying the complex interplay of power, ambition, and the unyielding pursuit of a kingdom's destiny. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sides. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.